All right, let's talk some NBA stuff. So not only are you at DNVR Sports, but you do the great podcast All NBA. And so I want to kind of throw some, right there in the background there for people watching on YouTube. So I want to just throw some teams at you, some topics at you. We'll go through them. But the big news from today, Tyrese Maxey, he's expected to miss multiple weeks with a right hamstring injury. ESPN reported that the Sixers are going to be, no surprise, cautious with this injury and with his return. Maybe perhaps even they might manage it. Joel Embiid's going to be back on Tuesday after serving a 3-game suspension. But because of injuries to him, to Paul George, to now Maxey, the craziest thing is that we're not going to see Philadelphia's 3 stars together. They're much ballyhooed 3 stars together for at least the first 4 weeks of this season. Crazy. When it's all said and done. And probably more, honestly. Like that's a optimistic outlook here. So a big topic coming into the season was how the Sixers were going to manage the health of these stars. But now we were always talking about Embiid and Paul George. Now we're talking about Tyrese Maxey and the management of him. So now he's in that mix. So I know it's early, but they're 1-7. I think by the time these guys come back and they're all playing together, they could be 4 or 5 games under 500, basically a month into the season. That's not, again, I know we're early in the year, but that's not easy to make up that ground, even in the Eastern Conference. So I don't know what else you do if you're the 76ers, because you do have to manage these guys. That was the plan the whole time. But I also don't think that they anticipated being 1-7 at this stage in the season either.
They're already 2 games back from, the playoffs, basically, which is, it doesn't sound like a lot, but we're only 2 weeks into the season to be back already. And if you look at it, 1-6, the Bucks and Sixers are at the bottom of the Eastern Conference.
It's crazy.
Minus 8.6 point differential is only better than the Washington Wizards. Only better. And their record isn't as good as the Wizards right now. It is a real hole. And when you talk about, we all just kind of penciled that trio in for working, but we all know that trios don't always fit on the court the way they do on paper, especially with, I've always criticized Joel Embiid for this one thing, as dominant as he is. Sometimes you're too dominant in a way that's like, hey, you actually need to be working on all things at once. You can win a lot of games, especially in January and February, just mashing the high usage button, right? Just keep scoring. But over the course of the season, you want to be able to do 3 or 4 things really well. And if you only do the one thing that's really easiest for you, at some point, someone's going to shut that off, and then you're not going to have a backup plan. Well, now you talk about, so even when everybody was healthy, I was curious to see that. Is this still just go through Embiid every single time, or are you trying to work some 2-man actions with the new guys and with Maxey? But now you look at it and go, now cut out a whole month of the season at minimum, maybe more than that, and you're before you get those reps, and identities start to form, habits start to form, like expectations start to form. So I look at this, and I'm actually pretty concerned for the 76ers. Because as you mentioned, 1-6, I would not be surprised if they go to like 1-9 by the time Embiid shows up. And now, even if you just do the math, they've got to win at like a 65% win pace just to get up to 50 wins. Every game below that, you're talking 47 wins at best. So they're in a hole.
So they were at that pace last year when Embiid was as dominant as he was, but that's a different team. It was a different season, and I was a different Joel Embiid, right? Joel Embiid has said, I'm not going to go as hard as I did last season. In terms of minutes played, games played, I just think his effort level is probably not going to be where it was last year when he was pretty transparently going for another MVP award and all these things. Like that stuff that mattered to him and evidently don't matter to him now, or at least allegedly. Over under 35 games, all 3 of those guys on the court in the regular season. Like
under,
right? Don't you take the under on that?
35 is such a low mark too, but under.
No, it's crazy. And the point you made is such a great one. Last year, and over the last couple of years, teams would scout out Joel Embiid, right? Like we knew what they were trying to get to, whether it was James Harden getting him the ball, Max getting him the ball. He wanted to get it in that high post and get into that jumper that he likes so much and sort of facilitate from there. And he did add some playmaking dynamics to his game last year, which is what made him so dominant when he was dominant before he got hurt. But it is hard to work guys in. It is hard. Like how does he work with Paul George? We kind of know what he's going to look like with Tyrese Maxey, but does Paul George just become souped up Tobias Harris standing in the corner, and now instead of doing nothing, every once in a while he attacks a closeout? Because I don't think that's a useful player, sure, but I don't know that that's a different sort of dynamic necessarily. And I think you could pretty much defend that relatively easily. So I don't know. It just feels like the worst kind of year possible for the Philadelphia 76ers. It just feels like everybody started the season except them.
And it also feels a little bit weird. I mean, some of the Embiid stuff, there was the investigation. It's just, Denver's running into this too, and that last year they win a championship, and last year they wore themselves out in the regular season and were exhausted, and so they come into the year thinking, all right, we're going to ease into it this year. We don't want to overextend ourselves, but the truth is, in the NBA, that line is really little between, okay, we're burning ourselves out, and we're not trying hard enough, and now we're in a hole. It feels like it should be this big chasm, but the truth is, it's just a little bit. And Philly, out of the gate, maybe swung a little too far. Some of it's just bad luck, of course, but maybe swung a little bit too cautious. And now here you are at 1-7. And it's like, oh crap, we burned up our runway. Now we don't have a margin of error the rest of the way.
And watch Tyrese Maxey in these games. They are relying on him so much, and that's why he probably got hurt here, is because he was just so overtaxed. And now you're going to be toggling through who's available and when and all these things, and maybe these guys all just sort of separately burn out in their own little silos here, and by the time you get to the playoffs, you're not really where you want to be. That's part of the thing, is like, you want these guys on the court together because you want them to develop the chemistry. But now, because you're so behind on the win-loss column, you need those guys out there to make up some ground in the standings too. Like,
they have 7 losses, Wes. If they were to win every game between now and Thanksgiving, every game, which of course they're not going to do, they're going to be without all their top 3 guys for the next 3. But if they were to win from now to Thanksgiving, they still would probably be the 3 seed in the Eastern Conference at best. So you look at that, and when you put it that way, if they won for the next 2.5 weeks, they have a hole to dig out of, and it's going to be it's razor thin margins.